and the responsibilities that come with them are still some of the hallmarks of our modern democracies. Which brings me to the second point on the timing of the summit. Those core tenets of our democracy are under attack today like never before. What we once thought was for granted is now being openly threatened in so many different ways. And while this is true everywhere around the world, it is also an urgent issue here in the European Union. We are, of course, seeing this in Ukraine, with Russia's brutal war of aggression, and we should be under no illusion about what this war is for Putin. It is, of course, about wiping off a free and independent Ukraine off the map. But it is also a war on the entire international rules-based system and an existential threat for the European Union and Europe. And it is an existential threat to our freedoms and democracies. I am, in particular, concerned about the rise of foreign interference and manipulation in our societies, our democracies, and our elections. Just think of what we have seen play out in the last few weeks across Europe. We have seen swarms of negative disinformation targeting different issues and individual candidates, like, for example, the fake video posted under the logo of Radio France Internationale, falsely claiming an epidemic of tuberculosis was imminent because of Ukrainian soldiers in French hospitals. And it is not just fakes and fabricated content. It is also buying influence and causing chaos. We have seen far-right politicians and lead candidates from AfD in Germany in the pockets of Russia. They are selling their souls on Russian propaganda outlets and videos. A close collaborator of a far-right politician was even arrested, accused of spying for China and giving it information from the European Parliament. We have also seen a huge spike in malicious cyber attacks, like the one on Danish energy infrastructure last year, or again in the last weeks in Sweden, Germany, Lithuania, Czechia, Poland, and others. My own campaign website was attacked by cyberbots just last week. The aim of all this is to divide our societies from within. And it is this deeper impact on society which I am most concerned about. Because the point about this malign interference is not just what is being said or done in each individual case. It is about sowing division and fanning the flames of extremism. It is about weakening our resilience or commitment to a cause, for example, supporting Ukraine. It is about eroding trust in our institutions and elections. It is about confusing people so they don't know who to believe, or if they can even believe anyone at all. And it is about giving cover and encouragement to the more dangerous extremes in our societies. And this leads to some of the shocking attacks and threats we have seen in this election, which I utterly condemn. And it leads to many promising young candidates that I speak to during this campaign, wondering whether they should get involved in politics at all. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot tolerate this, and we have to put a stop to this. And the good news is that we have done a lot in the last years on defense of democracy. We have regulated the digital platforms, and we have taken big steps on disinformation, media freedom, or the rules for political parties. The point is not that disinformation or malign interference is new. It is that the technology and the techniques used are currently moving faster than society can adapt and react. So it is now time to take our action to the next level. We must be as ambitious as the threat is serious. And this is why, if I'm elected as president, the Commission will put forward a European democracy shield as one of the key priorities of the next Commission, and this should be an ambitious European project that focuses on the biggest threats from foreign interference and manipulation. And allow me to give you some of the first elements of the European democracy shield. The first is about detection, because nothing is as powerful as unveiling information manipulation. This requires first and foremost a free media. And in addition, we need to build up public expertise in order to detect information manipulation. And this means, on one hand, better information and threat intelligence sharing from the various agencies that are dealing with this at national levels. But it also means creating new common capabilities at European level. There are very good examples on national level. Take the Sweden Psychological Defense Agency, or in France there is Viginum. And I believe Europe now needs its own dedicated structure on countering foreign interference. It will pool the necessary expertise and link up and coordinate with existing national agencies. The second element is about treatment. We have already made progress with the DSA, the Digital Services Act. So once we have detected malign information or propaganda, we need to ensure that it is swiftly removed and blocked. And this is the role of online platforms. Now they have a set of responsibilities with this DSA. We must be now very vigilant and uncompromising when it comes to ensuring that it is properly enforced. It is not just a moral responsibility the platform have. It is European law that has to be abided. Now, as things evolve, we have to assess if this is sufficient. And of course, I'm referring to artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, as you know, now allows for the creation of incredibly realistic deepfakes, which can have a very destabilizing role in electoral campaigns. And we have already seen that in Europe. And this is why our AI Act has some transparency requirements built in. And I'm very much welcoming that the political parties signed a voluntary code of conduct ahead of these elections. It's on the ethical use of AI campaign tools. But as we look ahead, we need to consider how to strengthen our approach to AI content, and in particular in deepfakes. And finally, it takes resilience. As technology evolves, we need to build up societal immunity around information manipulation. Because research has shown that pre-bunking is much more successful than debunking. Pre-bunking is basically the opposite of debunking. In short, prevention is preferable to cure. Perhaps if you think of information manipulation as a virus, instead of treating an infection once it has taken hold, that is debunking. It is much better to vaccinate so that the body is inoculated. Pre-bunking is the same approach. Because disinformation relies on people passing it on to others. It is essential that people know what malign information's influence is and what the techniques are that are behind it. And as the knowledge goes up, our chances of being influenced goes down. And that builds up the society resilience that we will need. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Europe's moment of truth in so many ways, whether it is on Ukraine, whether it is on defense, whether it is on competitiveness or democracy. And this is a message I hear everywhere as I travel around Europe before these elections. The challenges and the threats may appear daunting. And as I've mentioned, the truth is that we do have a fight on our hands. But we have shown in the last years that when we are united, Europe is stronger and much more resilient than we give it credit for. So let's not fight the authoritarians or the extremes at their own game. Let's fight them by offering a positive vision of the future. One which protects what we hold dear, our democracy and our values. One which builds a European democracy shield against foreign interference. One which steps up when and where it matters. That steps up for our security, for our prosperity, and of course, for our democracy. So long live Europe and long live European democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President van der Leyen. We hear a lot from elected officials. In fact, we've heard a lot from them this morning. But what about the citizens? What do they think about the issues? What do they think about their governments? What do they think about democracy? Well, the Democracy Perception Index tells us it has been produced for many years now in collaboration between Latana and the Alliance of Democracies. And with me here right now is Nico Jaspers, who is the CEO of Latana. So, Nico, the headline, what is the current state of democracy?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me again for the 6th year now in a row. We've been collecting this data for 6 years. And one of the most interesting questions I find that we always ask is people around the world, how important do you think democracy is for your country? And to start off this session with some good news, we have a record high across the world with 85% of people saying it is very important for our country, for my country, to be democratic. It's always been high, but we are at the highest we've ever measured. Now, beneath that, first of all, this is really spread across the world. There's not a single country where there's a majority of people saying, oh, it's actually not that important for my country to be democratic. There are some nuances, but in general, we see this really across the world, all countries that we measure. Now, if you dig a bit deeper, we also ask, how democratic do you think your country is? And there you see a bit more nuanced picture, and not just in countries what we would say the usual suspects, but some very established democracies like Japan and France, Greece, where people are a bit more skeptical. After that, we ask a battery of questions to understand aspects of democracy a bit better, freedom of speech and other things. And I want to pull out one interesting insight from this year's edition, and all this is published in a report which was really very, very interesting. We asked the question, do you think your government is acting in the interest of a majority or the minority? And the data here is interesting and very alarming. You see all those countries in red are countries where a majority of people think that the government is acting in the interest of a minority. Now, that usually means it's not acting in my interest for people. And ignore the maybe China for now, because there are different dynamics going on. But what you see here is that the Americas and almost all of Europe, with the notable exception of the Nordics and Switzerland, people say the government is acting in the interest of a minority. And this is pretty alarming, I think, because this nurtures resentment. This will show in upcoming elections. Another question, and to close off this part then, is we ask people, what do you think your government's priority should be? And every country is different, of course. We aggregate those numbers, and these are also very interesting. The absolute number one is reduce poverty, followed by number two, corruption. This is a real worry for many people across the world, second most important. And the third most important is promote economic growth. So you're starting to get a picture here of the government is acting in the interest of a minority, and please focus more on poverty, corruption, and economic growth. And this is really something to think about in all the countries that we covered, but especially in Europe and the US, I think.
What did the survey tell you about perceptions of the US and Russia and China?
Also very interesting data on this one. We started measuring this only 3 years ago, so we have 3 years now trends. Perception of global powers. We measure a bunch of global actors, global powers. The EU, which is nice for the previous speaker and maybe for the next one, has the most positive perception of the actors that we measure around the world, followed by the UN, and then with a bit distance, but still a very positive overall global view, the US. One interesting thing that happened over the past years is that the perception of China across the world has gone from a net negative to a slight net positive. So that's something notable, and we'll go into sub-trends here in a bit. But the biggest change, really, from a very low starting point, admittedly, but is a very steep rise in the perception of Russia, from very negative to less negative. But this is a very strong dynamic that we see here. And we break this down into individual regions. And again, all this is in the report, and you can also get the raw data to then look at every country, how they perceive these actors across the 50 plus countries. What's happened for the US is that perception in Latin America is pretty stable. Perception in Asia is pretty stable. Globally, it's pretty stable, a slight decrease. But in the MENA region, it has decreased massively. And in Europe, it has also decreased substantially. Now, I should say this was before the approval of the aid budget to Ukraine, the fieldwork for this. So this might not reflect the recent weeks. But this is something that is concerning for people like us here, I think. We have China, very popular in the MENA region, very high net positive approval rating, if you will. Very positive in Latin America and growing. Same in Asia, same globally. Very negative in Europe with a slight decrease, but pretty stable. And now comes Russia, and this is really interesting, where you have a steep, very steep rise in the MENA region, a steep rise in Asia, in Latin America, across the world, and the region where this has been a negative is Europe. So this really is something to think about, how Russia is not just perceived in Europe or the US, but across the world. And we've seen this a bit last year, and this trend has just accelerated.
So the war in Ukraine is clearly a factor here. What did you find about support for Ukraine in your survey?
I forgot a couple of slides, but we can skip this. Russia and Chinese are very favorable, have very favorable views of each other, and then they view the US very negative, and in Europe it's a bit more mixed. To your question on Ukraine, which is, of course, very topical, what we see, another one that I skipped, influence of US on democracy, support for Ukraine. Something that we've seen in the past 2 years, and that holds pretty stable, is that we ask people whether they're in favor of cutting economic ties with Russia, which is a proxy on their stance. And we had a huge kind of favor of cutting ties in North America and Europe, and against cutting ties in the rest of the world. And this really shows the split of the world on this question, which is really important. By the way, we also asked that question, since Anders mentioned China and Taiwan. For China and Taiwan, it's also in the report. Very interesting data here. So this has not changed. So despite everything that has been going on the past 2 years, the by and large people in the US and Europe are in favor of cutting ties with Russia, except for this little green spot there that you see in Europe, Hungary, but apart from that, and Greece, but apart from that, there's a very strong support for cutting ties. Now, something that is interesting and different from previously is we also ask overall, what's your stand? Does NATO, the EU, and the US, do they do too much to support Ukraine? Do they do just about the right amount, or do they do too little? And here, very interesting, there's an overwhelming support for either keeping up the current level of support or doing more. 80% across the world overall are saying we need to keep up the support or do more, and only 20% say we should do less. Now, in Europe, very similar numbers overall. In the US, you have a growth in the numbers of people who are saying we do too much. Again, this was before the aid came out. As a German, the last chart is very concerning for me, and we need to do a lot more in Germany, I think, to explain why we need to support Ukraine. We have a massive increase in the number of people who are saying we're doing too much. Still 60% of the German population say we're doing the right amount or we need to do more. But 40% now, up from 14% 2 years ago, are saying we're doing too much. And this is something to really think about and to work on. We have a lot of work ahead of us.
And we'll see what the data shows next year. Thank you, Nico Jacker, CEO of Latana. Great to have you with us here again to give us the big picture. So let's get reaction to the DPI and many other things with our next guest. Please welcome Charles Michel, President of the European Council. How are you? And as we get settled, let me say that we will be taking some audience questions here. So use your app and send some to us. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate your being here. So we've heard a couple of fascinating things this morning already. Let's talk first about Ukraine. Beleaguered on the battlefield, huge new offensive from the Russians, clearly having some impact on Ukrainian morale. Is it also further weakening, in your opinion, support for Ukraine in Europe?
I can tell you that in the European Council, the 27 European leaders, we are absolutely determined because we know what's at stake, we understand what's at stake, and you know that at the EU's level, we need to decide by unanimity when it comes to Ukraine, for instance. And since day one, we have been making decisions by unanimity in terms of military support, which is new for the EU. It's a fundamental decision we made a few days following the full-scale invasion. And more recently, you know that we decided to grant the candidate status to Ukraine, very strong geopolitical signal, and we decided to mobilize an additional package of 50 billion euros. But this is not enough. We have to do more. And I was following the numbers and the polls, and it shows that in our 27 democracies, the political leaders, they have the responsibility responsibility to explain and to try to convince our people that what we are doing in support for Ukraine, this is not only a question of generosity, it's also a question of common interest.
So do you think that support will last as long as it needs to last?
Yes, I think so, and I think that this will be a crucial choice for the next European team following the European elections. And I'm very confident that the next European team will understand that this is fundamental to support Ukraine. I give you one other example. You know that for decades across the EU there was this debate about the possible European defense and the possibility to invest more and to develop this political project. But in fact, we were not able to make significant steps. I think that today this is a totally different situation. From a political point of view, the overall thinking is totally different. Why? Because of the full-scale invasion. And because we have seen how it was difficult for the United States to make a decision on this financial package, the 60 billion euros. And we understand that we have to do more for our own security. And that's why, even if I do not underestimate the challenges and the difficulties, I'm not naive. But on the other hand, I think that at the EU's level, when we face serious challenges, we understand that we need to act.
So your predecessor said that Europe was in a pre-war era. Is it ready?
I think that we are more ready than we were 1 year or 2 years
ready enough?
before, but we are not ready enough. And that's why I think that if I have a look at the fundamental priorities for the years to come at the EU's level, there are 3 fundamental topics. For sure, the values, democratic principles, this is the foundation of this political project. For sure, the economic development, the economic base, this is fundamental. If you want to be strong, if you want to be influential, we need to develop our economic base. And there is a third pillar, this is defense and security. And here, there is something which is positive. I think that more than before, the political leadership at the national level across the EU, we understand that we need to invest more in the field of defense, in the field of security, to be more resilient, point one. But there is another aspect that we will need to improve. This is the European industrial base. And here there is a question of financing and the leaders. We are addressing those challenges. For instance, we are opening the door for the European Investment Bank. That could be a very powerful tool to invest much more in the future in this defense sector. Because if we want to be credible in the field of defense, we need an industrial base, and today we are too fragmented in that field.
So the European elections, as mentioned by some of our previous speakers, are coming up shortly, and it's expected that fringes on the right and left are going to gain power. Is that in part a reflection of what we saw in that poll, disillusionment with government and the sense that governments are now serving minorities rather than the majority of their population?
No, I would like to be careful with the polls because if you would have followed the polls, Brexit would have not taken place. Donald Trump would have not been president of the United States. That's why we need to be careful. And I also remember that 5 years ago, a few weeks before the European elections, all of us, we were expecting a big victory for the extreme political parties, and finally it was not the case. Let's see what will be the outcome. But one thing is certain, the voters, the citizens, the people, they are expecting us, the political leaders at the European level and at the national level, to deliver. And what are the main tasks? Security, peace, security, and improving the conditions of life, economic growth and social cohesion. This is the challenge we face. And if I have a look at the recent years, at the EU's level, I don't say that everything was perfect, but we did a lot, and we have been facing serious difficulties, but we did a lot.
So are you predicting that the left and the right will not make significant gains in the election?
I'm not too obsessed by the polls. You know, I'm a politician.
I'm not talking about the polls. I'm asking about your sense of the population.
I sincerely think that the next European Parliament will be very strong to defend and to support Ukraine, very strong to defend the rule of law, and very strong to defend a bold European Union. And I still think that there will be a clear majority in favor of those fundamental principles.
Do you think that a mainstream politician, a centrist, should make alliances with parties on the right in order to gain political power? Is that damaging to democracy?
No,
See that happening?
What is important, in my opinion, this is the policy, this is the substance, and what are the decisions we are making. I don't want to give one concrete example, but I remember that sometimes in the council, when there were elections in one member state, there were some doubts and some worries, and then we have seen that it was possible to work with the leadership of countries, including when in one coalition you have some political parties more oriented to the right of the political landscape.
So you're okay with, if it's expedient, to ally then with people on the far right?
The question in the European Parliament will be, what are the political parties ready to cooperate, to collaborate, to support Ukraine, to defend the democratic principles, and to make the EU stronger? And if I'm observing the reality of those political parties that you qualified at the far right, the reality is sometimes a bit more balanced, and some of those personalities within those parties are personalities with whom it is possible to cooperate because they can share the same goals, the same views on those topics, and with some others, it's, in my opinion, not possible to cooperate.
So, is there a way for centrists to regain more the trust and confidence of more of the electorate?
Yeah, I think this is a fundamental question, because we can see that in today's politics, this may be more difficult for some rational political parties and rational personalities to convince. And sometimes this is easier to play with the emotions, to try to rally the support of the people. But I'm still confident that centrist parties, they have a central role to play for the EU's future. And I know that this is usual. A few weeks before the elections, that we are worried and that we think that the worst will come. I am a bit more calm, I'm a bit more serene, and I am certainly confident that following the elections, the European leadership will have to take two major decisions. On the one hand, what is the political program for the 5 years to come? And the 27 heads of states are working very hard for months about this political program for the 5 years to come, and who will be those who will assume the responsibilities. And those decisions will be made in the weeks to come, in the weeks following the European elections in June.
Several audience questions. Let me get to some of them. How do we ensure a balance between providing full support for the Ukrainian government's defense and combating corruption in Ukraine?
Yeah, I think that we need to do both, and I think that the fact that we decided to grant the candidate status to Ukraine, and I hope that in June we can start the real negotiations with this first intergovernmental meeting that is supposed to take place. I think it's the best encouragement for the Ukrainians to make the reforms that are needed, and I'm absolutely certain that without this prospect of this EU membership, it would be much more difficult to convince the Ukrainian authorities to do what is needed. And you know that I'm in very close contact and in constant contact with Volodymyr Zelensky and his team, and I know how they are dedicated to do everything which is needed to implement the reforms that are needed, including in the field of the fight against corruption. And it's absolutely fundamental also because it will help us to convince our public opinion, our citizens across the EU and across the United States probably, that we are right to support Ukraine because they are using in the right way the financial means we provide to them to defend themselves, but also to defend our common future and our common fundamental values.
I want to ask you about Georgia. Massive protests there over the foreign influence bill that probably will get approval perhaps today. What's that going to do to the prospects of Georgia becoming a member of the EU?
Look, I would like to be frank. I'm personally disappointed by what's going on in Georgia. Why? Because a few years ago, I had the occasion to play a role to try to help to unblock the political system that was totally blocked. Point one. Point two. A few months ago, I can tell you that in the European Council, the 27 member states, there was no majority to support the candidate status for Georgia, but together with some European leaders, we were convinced that for many reasons it was the right choice to grant the candidate status to Georgia, and we have been working a lot, including with the Georgian authorities, and to convince them to implement some reforms that were absolutely needed, and they made some important steps last year and by the end of last year, and we granted the candidate status. And only a few weeks later, we are observing this attempt to pass this legislation. Let's see what will be done by the president, because she has a veto right, point one. Point two, we are observing a certain rhetoric, which is not a positive rhetoric, I would say. We are in contact with the Georgian authorities. I sincerely hope that the Georgian authorities will make the clarity about their intentions. But if they want to get closer to the EU, if they want to join the EU, they have to respect the fundamental principles of the rule of law and the democratic principles. We have to be clear, and we are very clear, and I sincerely hope that we will succeed to convince them to fulfill the conditions that are needed to join the EU.
We have another question about Georgia. In fact, we have several. This one is not only for your assessment of the situation which you've given, but your thoughts on how the West can prevent Russian influence from affecting Georgia.
Yes, this is very clear that the Russian purpose is to undermine everywhere where it is possible the democratic principles, or the attempt to strengthen the rule of law. And that's why we need to support all those in Georgia. And I know that a vast majority of the Georgian people, they want to get closer to the EU. They want to join the EU. And they have to feel that we are supporting them, and that we are doing everything that is possible to counter those Russian attempts to undermine this Georgian dream to become a member of the EU.
Someone else asks what you have to say to the youth in all generations who are now protesting in Tbilisi.
Yeah, that we are on the side of the rule of law. We are on the side on the freedom, on the democratic principle, and we intend to use the tools we have in our possession to try to convince the Georgian authorities to do what is needed. There will be elections in Georgia in the months to come, and I sincerely hope that those elections will be also an occasion to give a legitimacy and to give a clear signal what is the direction they want for their country.
Another audience member asks, are you expecting major changes in the EU agenda if President Trump wins?
The simple fact that the question is asked is very interesting, in my opinion, because in fact, if we believe, which is my case, in the European sovereignty, in the European strategic autonomy, we should consider that we have to be master of our own future, of our own destiny, and it shows that.
But you've had a very close, and some would say dependent relationship with the U.S., and President Trump has said, Putin, do what you want to do in Europe.
Yeah, but I'm very clear that the United States and the EU, we are a very close ally, and this is very important.
And will remain so?
And this is we are a very close ally, and this is very important. But on the other hand, we can see that on some topics, the EU, we have our own vision, we have our own interests. Do you remember when Donald Trump was president, in the field of climate change, for instance, we didn't have exactly the same vision about what was needed at the international level. Another example, on Iran, for instance, we had not the same views about what was needed to maintain a certain channel of communication with Iran. But this is very clear that with Donald Trump or without Donald Trump, one thing is absolutely certain. The absolute priority for this political generation across the EU, in my opinion, is a more resilient EU, a more influential EU. It means that we have to be a credible partner partner, a credible ally. That's why it's important to invest more in defense and security, to assume more responsibilities. On the other hand, if I have a look at the economic situation, at the economic base, I think that in the future, for the next European Commission, for the next European leadership, it will be extremely important to be much more efficient in terms of strengthening the single market and strengthening the capacity to innovate in Europe.
President Charles Michel of the European Council, thanks so much for joining us here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And now, it is my honor to introduce Vjosa Osmani, the President of Kosovo.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Democracy needs us as much as we need democracy. And these past few years across the globe, and especially in our continent, democracy is being tested. Regrettably, we are witnessing a relentless assault on democratic values by autocrats who view democracy as a direct threat to their ambitions. However, the stronger their desire to undermine democracy, the stronger should be our determination to protect it. I'm convinced that democracy is as strong as the will of the people to embrace it, as resilient as our determination to protect it, and as robust as our resistance against the powers that constantly want to undermine it. I'm proud to stand on this podium today to share with you a glimpse of Kosovo's history as a story of hope, a story of democracy delivering. Today, as the most thriving democracy in the Western Balkans, my country is a genuine testament to how a people's fortune can be transformed when they are afforded a path to independence, freedom, and democracy. Emerging from the ashes of a genocidal war, Kosovo's journey was indeed challenging. However, our path was always illuminated by the unwavering aspiration and commitment to peace, equality, and prosperity. So democracy lays at the very foundation of everything we do. From institutional governance to adopting laws and policies, as well as building alliances, democracy remains our guiding path. In Kosovo, we have borne witness to the stark consequences of when democracy is undermined. Therefore, we stand resolute in our commitment to safeguard our country against the return of such darkness. We recognize that the threats to our democratic values are both real and relentless, but our resolve to protect the hard-won freedoms we cherish remains unyielding. As we know, democracy is not and cannot be a standalone endeavor. It requires alliances, alliances that allow it to thrive in partnerships. The European Union, as well as NATO, today stand as some of the most pivotal alliances known in modern history. Hence, for Kosovo, a future in the Euro-Atlantic family is the reality that will fortify democracy and security at home, in our region, as well as beyond. By opening the doors of these alliances to my country, you gain a steadfast partner, one that never takes democracy and freedom for granted, and is ready to pay any price to defend them. In this endeavor, we are not asking for shortcuts. We have made enormous strides from strengthening democratic governance to battling corruption and upholding the rule of law. The Republic of Kosovo truly has turned into a front-runner reformer. In our history, we have never attacked any other country. not even once. Yet, we have always stood up to malign, destabilizing, occupying, and genocidal forces who attacked our people. And we will continue to do so for as long as it's necessary. And the reasons are very obvious. Peace is what leads to democracy, and democracy leads to prosperity. And prosperity leads to protection of human dignity. The transformational power of democracy in human lives is indispensable. So today, championing democracy in Europe inherently means standing up for a Europe whole, free, and at peace. Just as the victory of Ukraine will define our contemporary historical trajectory, so will our success in thwarting security threats in our region will be as decisive for enabling sustainable peace in the Western Balkans and Europe at large. This is not a fight for one. This is a fight for all. And with this in mind, the ambiguity surrounding Kosovo's path towards Euro-Atlantic integration creates a very risky void, ripe for exploitation by the adversaries of democracy. This uncertainty lays fertile ground for Russia and its proxies to undermine all of our collective achievements. It is imperative, now more than ever, for both NATO and the EU to apply an open door policy for established democracies like my country, ensuring that no region remains susceptible to the disruptive schemes of Putin. So, ladies and gentlemen, achieving a peaceful, just, and democratic world is a shared responsibility, no matter how big the small the country is. Strong alliances have been and continue to be the lifeline for the defense of democracy globally. In this journey, the Republic of Kosovo will always be a force for peace in the world and your steadfast ally in the global fight for democracy. Thank you very much.
And welcome on stage for further debate. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
President Osmani, before we start, I also want to announce that we try to make this a little interactive. So if you have questions during the debate, you can send it through the app and I will include them in our discussion. You mentioned the situation of your country right now, but maybe give us the latest update on what the situation on the border is.
As you know, Kosovo borders Serbia, a country that not just recently, but especially recently is proving to be a very loyal Russian proxy that is trying to play by Putin's playbook by destabilizing the Western Balkans and in turn open a new front against the West. Because obviously the spillover effect through which Russia would achieve diverting the attention of the West from Ukraine is exactly what they would need at this point. Therefore, the work that we're doing alongside our allies, because as you know, we have a NATO presence in Kosovo, to make sure that Kosovo remains safe, secure, peaceful, and stable is absolutely something that we're doing 24/7. And we've increased cooperation and coordination with our allies to make sure that every destabilizing intention at the northern border of Kosovo is thwarted successfully. Last year, we've had such an attack. It was a paramilitary attack that amounted to an act of aggression by Serbia, but we managed to immediately thwart it despite of its magnitude because we worked together with our allies. But that doesn't mean that they would not try again in the future. What it means is that we will be successful in stopping them at the very first, probably hours.
So you mentioned the fact that the conflict in Russia and the geopolitical approach of Russia, if we call it like this, has a direct impact also on the security situation in Kosovo. Can you elaborate this a little further?
I would say not just in Kosovo, obviously in the rest of Europe, but of course Russia will try to find fertile ground for it to expand the conflict. And they try to do that in parts of Europe that are still not members of NATO, because it's easier from a security point of view to do that, which is why I believe that this talks about the indispensability of the countries of the Western Balkans who want to join NATO to actually move on as fast as possible, and for NATO, as I said earlier, to have its open door policy mean more than just words, because to be NATO for our countries means to be safe, and the more of us in the Western Balkans join, the less there will be an opportunity for Putin and its proxies like Serbia to destabilize Europe through the Western Balkans. So I think at this point it's extremely important that we quickly move on with a robust Euro-Atlantic integration agenda for those countries in the Western Balkans who actually fulfill the criteria, because we're not arguing for shortcuts. We have done our homework. We fulfilled the criteria. We need to move on for the sake of the security of the entire continent, because a destabilized Western Balkans undoubtedly will have a negative effect in the security of the rest of Europe as well.
You're not asking for a shortcut, but you're asking for a path that is clear and defined. What's your expectation towards the EU in that regard?
Absolutely. A shortcut, not, but definitely a defined path. Well, we have applied for membership in the European Union, but the application has not even been looked at yet, which is a very difficult message to swallow for the people of the Western Balkans. Because Kosovo right now, alongside a few other countries in our region, is at a 100% alignment with all of the European Union common security and defense policy decisions. We've adopted sanctions against Russia, the first one in the region to do so, against Iran, and of course, not just the sanctions policy, but the economic policy, the rule of law reforms, and every other reform that the European Union has required of us, we've been undertaking at a very rapid rate, especially in the past 3 years. And despite of all of that, we don't see the European Union delivering in showing the people of Kosovo, at least, that there is hope, that there is a clear path, and just, telling us what else do we need to do. So they're not telling us what else we need to do. It's just there's like a block, I would say, for pure political reasons, for domestic political considerations of just a few countries, but in turn, this is endangering peace and stability in the Western Balkans. Because the more the countries will not see a clear path towards the European Union, trust me, there will never be a vacuum. Malign forces will always reach out to find a way to destabilize our part of the world. Now, Kosovo so far has been entirely free of malign influence from Russia and China, and we're the only, for example, country that is not part of the China Road and Belt Initiative. But that doesn't mean that the fact that they have influence in other countries in the region, that will not lead to more instability and lack of peace and progress in our country as well. So I think the European Union delivering in the sense that making sure that Kosovo gets a candidate status is the path forward in making sure that all the 6 countries of the Western Balkans move towards what is, I think, the only path to a Europe whole, free, and at peace, which is making sure that this part of Europe also joins based on the criteria that they fulfill.
Which only works when you continue your efforts to reduce corruption in the country. You have seen success in the past 3 years, but
Absolutely.
Still you're not where you should be or want to be.
Well, I do think that democracy and rule of law should never be finished projects. You should always strive for more. So yes, some historical progress has been made in the past 3 years, but we should not, feel fulfilled with what has been done, because we still need a robust vetting system for the justice system, where most of the problem lies in making sure that there is a proper rule of law and equality for all. And unless we achieve that, we should never feel like we have achieved the results that we intended when we first took office. So there's still a lot to do, but what is extremely important, that even based on democratic indices around the world, Kosovo is one of the top rule of law reformers, not just in the Western Balkans, but Europe and the world. For example, in the Democracy Summit that is led by President Biden, Kosovo has been picked from more than 100 and something countries to lead the rule of law cohort precisely because it's championing rule of law reforms. Still a lot to do, but I think we're in the right trajectory.
Settling the tensions with Serbia is certainly one point that makes everything easier that you were just discussing. Now, you mentioned the aspect that is on Serbia's side. Let's also maybe discuss what can be on Kosovo's side. The 2022 US and EU plans would see Belgrade drop down the lobbying against Kosovo's seat in international organization, but the exchange would be creating an association of Serb-majority municipalities. Do you think this is still on the table?
As far as we're concerned, it is, because we want to honor every single agreement that we've achieved as part of the EU-led dialogue. However, as in every other contract, I don't mean to oversimplify, but as in every other contract, there are two parties. And if one doesn't implement any of its parts but constantly undermines the agreement, and in the case of Serbia also publicly states that they will not implement it, that they do not accept it, then the question is there an agreement after all? So we've been asking the European Union to require both parties to implement in parallel. So we're not running away from the obligations that stem from that agreement when it comes to Kosovo, but Serbia needs to implement at the same time. And let me be more concrete here. Kosovo's main obligation from that agreement relates to the rights of minority communities, more specifically creating an association of Serb majority municipalities. But that is conditional to Serbia exercising a de facto recognition in parallel at the same time, because as it was stated by President Macron, Chancellor Scholz, and all of the leaders of the European Union. But while Serbia does the exact opposite, and they say we will never have de facto or de jure recognition, we will never allow Kosovo to get membership in any international organization. The question is, what are the safeguards that we will have, especially security safeguards, to not allow this association of Serb-majority municipalities to get completely out of hand? Let's look at the problems that Bosnia is facing because of Republika Srpska. Obviously, the association that has been presented today does not resemble Republika Srpska, but we need to make sure that it's not even a distant cousin of it, so that we don't create more headaches in terms of security and stability in the Balkans for ourselves as well as our allies. So the only way how this can work, if the entirety of the agreement is implemented, not just to ask Kosovo implement all of its parts and give Serbia a green pass to get away with anything they want. So, for example, we've just applied for the Council of Europe, we've passed the first two phases successfully, and now we're being told, well, you need to implement the association, while when we ask, okay, will Serbia do its implementation in parallel at the same time, which means voting in favor of Kosovo in the Council of Europe, well, no one is asking them to do that. So I think as long as there's this complete lack of balance, it's really destroying the credibility of the dialogue and is making many in Kosovo question, well, if there's only one party that is going to implement, what's the point of having an agreement? What's the point of having a dialogue? If that was the case, then, why do we sit with Serbia and sign these agreements? So, I mean, the point is that we've offered to sign this agreement, the so-called German-French proposal, the EU proposal, plenty of times. Serbia never wanted to sign it. I mean, the Serbian president says, I have pain in my right hand and then I have pain in my left hand. So now I'm going to have pain for the next couple of years. I'm not going to sign it. And then the Serbian prime minister in the EU Western Balkan summit, where I participated as well, in front of all of the leaders said, we will not implement this agreement. And then she sent a letter confirming the same. And no EU leader, no EU member state or EU leader in that room said, what do you mean you're not going to implement it? You accepted it. If you accepted, based on the Vienna Convention and the law of the treaties, you don't necessarily need a signature. So if you accepted it, how come now you're retreating and withdrawing from it? But no one is talking to them in that way. Everyone is coming to us and telling us, doesn't matter what Serbia does. you have to implement it unilaterally. Well, we would if there was no security risk from this association of Serb majority municipalities. We would if we had not known the history of Republika Srpska and how, in fact, in 1991, it started as an association of Serb majority municipalities and it ended to the Frankenstein-Dodik Republic that we all know of today.
But how else, if not through the municipalities, would you secure the security of the Serbian minorities in northern Kosovo?
In fact, that association achieves the exact opposite. Fine, we've accepted it and we will honor our obligations, but that doesn't mean that we agree that it's a good idea for the minorities. In fact, Kosovo has right now, as we speak, the most advanced system and the most advanced constitutional protections for its minorities in the continent of Europe. I mean, in how many of your countries a minority of 3 to 4% have a veto of any constitutional amendment, have 20 guaranteed seats in the parliament, have a veto over any legislative change related to human rights, religious rights, education rights, reforming the system on elections and so on and so forth. I haven't found any such other country that affords such rights to the minority communities. We have created 10 additional municipalities for the Serbs to lead, and we have created the most decentralized system of rights for the municipalities that exists in Europe based on Council of Europe standards, and we've also went above and beyond. So they do have this system through which they are protected. And now what Serbia is asking is so that we create an association of municipalities where they are all gathered and they are led by a president, which Vučić will be very easy to control. So what Serbia wants is not rights for minority communities. In fact, I've been in politics for more than 2 decades. I've participated in negotiations for Kosovo's status under Ahtisaari, and I've really been following the dialogue. Never over these years did Serbia put on the table a proposal that relates to the human rights and freedoms of the Serb community in Kosovo. All that they ever wanted are solutions that could lead afterwards to territorial divisions of Kosovo. So they are after the territory, not after the human rights. So I think the system that we afford right now to the minority communities protects them more than the association, which allows Vučić to have an instrument through which they would undermine our sovereignty and territorial integrity, try to destroy us from within, as they are trying to do with Bosnia. However, this is a solution that was put in the table and was really insisted upon by our allies. We've accepted it, and of course, as I said, we will implement it in line with our constitution as long as Serbia implements at the same time, because this de facto recognition and membership of Kosovo in international organizations would create some sort of safeguards for Kosovo as an independent and sovereign country, even after we create the association of majority municipalities.
Very short answer to the end with the demand for a very, very short question with a demand for a very short answer at the end. If you wish a year where Kosovo could be part of the European Union, what's your year?
Well, I would say definitely by 2030. I would look into, even if we look right now at the level of compliance with acquis communautaire, standards on rule of law, democracy and human rights, Kosovo is well advanced compared to every other country in the Western Balkans, and we shouldn't shy away to say that. Based on that, I would say between 2028 to 2030 is what Kosovo deserves. That doesn't mean that that's what I expect the EU to deliver, but I think if the EU would truly start to think about its own long-term security and stability, it would really work into bringing those democracy-prone, rule-of-law-prone countries closer to itself and make sure that those who do not respect democracy and rule of law do not get the EU cash either.
President Vjosa Osmani, thank you very much for your
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
So we all saw the horror of the October 7th attack on Israel, and we are all seeing the ongoing tragedy in Gaza. And my guess is that every one of us is asking, where do we go from here? We have a two-part conversation on this subject. Joining me first is Johan Plesner, president of the Israel Democracy Institute. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Good morning. And I'm really sorry that I couldn't join you in person, but it's a very unique day in Israel. It's the day where we celebrate our independence. And yesterday we were mourning our deceased soldiers. So it was pretty difficult for me to join in person in such a period. I play a role both as a reservist, as a major in reserves, as a leader of the country's largest think tank, and I couldn't leave the country. So my apologies.
Technology is a wonderful thing. We're glad to have you with us virtually. So the title of this session is The Road to a Two-State Democracy. Do you see any way to get there from here?
Well, it's a huge challenge because there were so many attempts in the past, even before we talk about a two-state democracy, to try and implement two-state solutions. A two-state democracy is even taking it one step farther, because how many functioning, stable democracies do we have in the Arab world? None, perhaps. So to imagine that the first functioning democracy would be a future Palestinian state, I'm quite skeptical in the foreseeable future. Unfortunately, obviously, that would be the desire, the ideal, and the best outcome. About a two-state solution, I remember myself in the 90s as a relative youngster supporting Rabin, and as a young officer in the military, supporting and hoping for the success of Prime Minister Rabin's efforts as he initiated the Oslo process that then enjoyed huge support among the Israeli population. And ultimately it crumbled. There was an attempt later on by Prime Minister Barak, voted in around this agenda in 99, and it collapsed. There was an attempt by Prime Minister Olmert in the Annapolis process, again elected around the idea of dividing the land, and that fell apart. So there was quite a few genuine, and there was back, I think this last serious attempt was in 2014. So there were quite a few serious attempts. And I think if we want a future attempt to promote a stable two-state outcome, is we actually have to deal with the root causes of what led to the failures of the previous processes. I don't think, frankly, that right now, if I try to analyze the Palestinian side, there is Hamas on the one hand, a very strong, obviously, force within the Palestinian population, with a clear goal of annihilating the Jewish state in a strong alliance with Iran. So Hamas is not a counterpart for any kind of a future stable state.
So ask me if there is one. Answer if there is one. If it's not Hamas, is it the Palestinian Authority?
And then when we look at the Palestinian Authority, it's a good question, because I'm very moderate and pragmatic, but we cannot disregard, when we look at the Palestinian Authority, it's first of all led by a leader that is probably at this point in his life, nearing the age of 90, is not in any position to make core compromises that are necessary in order to achieve two states. He's overseeing an entity that is dysfunctional, corrupt, incapable of managing its institutions. As a matter of fact, if it wasn't for Israeli projection of security capabilities, Hamas probably would have gotten rid of Abu Mazen, the leader of the PA, a long time ago. So the PA, again, and if we look at the curriculum, the fact that it's does not educate in any way its population for any kind of an idea of coexistence, the fact that it provides lifelong stipends for those who engage in acts of terror and their families. It's a problematic, but the only counterpart, the upside is that there was a shaky but nevertheless stable security collaboration between Israel and the PA for the past 2 decades. So some kind of a collaboration with the PA can build the foundations for a possible outcome of 2 sovereign entities. But if we're serious about it, it will take time. It will require milestones, something of a roadmap of moving forward, and it will require strong external incentives from strong moderate players to sort of show the right direction for a future reformed PA.
So give me your assessment of the health of Israeli democracy.
Well, it's almost like we're looking into the distant past, but just recently, on October 6th, Israel was deeply immersed in an internal struggle and divide, dispute, confrontation, the deepest confrontation that this country ever dealt with around the nature of our democracy. The pro-liberal democratic camp in Israel went out in an extremely impressive show of democratic resistance and protests for many, many weeks, since January until October. Every week, hundreds of thousands in the streets. At the peak, there were events of about 1 million people coming out throughout the country. I mean, I don't think that since World War II there was any in any democratic or other country there was such a massive part of the population going out to support democracy. And on the other hand, the coalition led by Prime Minister Netanyahu was trying to promote a different version of democracy that is focused mainly on the principle of majority rule. So if you have the majority in parliament, half of the population plus one supports you, you can pretty much control all levers of power. The institute that I lead was a strong opposer of this paradigm or perception of democracy. But interestingly, if you look, just one quick detail, about 70% of Israelis oppose that, and 70% of Israelis support the establishment of a constitution based on our Declaration of Independence principles that pretty much laid the foundations for a liberal democracy. So while the political system went in a sort of deviant direction, when you look at the Israeli people and their preferences, I'm quite confident.
So the war has obviously changed many things. The Israeli public is largely behind the war effort. What happens whenever the war ends to Israeli democracy? Is that going to provide an opportunity for reform or not?
Yeah, of course. The Israeli public, once the horrific massacres of October 7th took place, it was a shock to all of us. By the way, we are still in October 7th in Israel, and I think that perhaps may account for some of the divide that we're seeing between sort of some of the public opinion in Western countries and what's happening in Israel. We are still living the trauma of October 7th. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis are still displaced from their homes. Dozens of communities are still have not recovered and are not inhabited. More than 130 hostages are still in Hamas hands. The terrible story. We had a peek, a short peek into what happens for one day if we don't have, in this part of the world, if you don't have a very, very strong military to protect you. And that sort of awakens all the traumas of Israeli and Israelis and persecution that our people have gone through also in other parts of the world.
Mr. Plesner, we are out of time. I want to quickly ask you, when are we going to see Israeli elections?
Well, 70% of Israelis, give or take, want an election the moment the war is over. This is an ambiguous term, but the moment there will be a perception, any kind of a ceasefire, I think we'll have an election. And to answer your previous question, I think if I look at public opinion polls, this will also lead to a domestic rejuvenation of our democracy, some constitutional understandings in broad consensus, a change in the way our governance institutions operate based on the lessons learned of the war. So I think there's some cause for optimism as well within the very difficult tragedies that we're experiencing at present.
Johan Plesner, president of the Israel Democracy Institute, thank you so much for joining us remotely. We wish you'd been here.
As a son of a Dane, I really wanted the opportunity to come to Denmark and Copenhagen, but hopefully in the future.
We hope so. And now another perspective. We have joining us again remotely, Fadi El Salameen, a non-resident fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. We see you. Can we hear you? Hello.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. I want to start with you, the same place I started the previous interview. Is a two-state democracy a pipe dream?
Yes, that is the short answer, and that is the honest answer at this point. We have about 34,000 people dead in Gaza. The idea that you could build a two-state solution now on top of that with the current Israeli government is entirely absurd. My worry is that not just the two-state solution is absurd and is no longer possible. My worry is that the entire region and its security could completely deteriorate if we are not calling for a ceasefire immediately. If you don't follow what is happening in Jordan, and Jordan is right at the borders with Iraq and Syria, two very ripe areas for Iranian activities. The idea that more and more people could cross into Jordan, could cross into the West Bank, where, God forbid, that this could happen, then it's just unfathomable. Gaza will become literally a sideshow to the nightmare that exists today. So in short, the idea of a two-state solution at this point is completely a complete pipe dream. We need a ceasefire. The military solution has failed. It does not work in Gaza. It is not producing the results that the Israeli government said it would produce. And in order to really arrive at a two-state solution, there has to be the right climate, there has to be the right leadership on the Israeli side. The gentleman before me was speaking fondly of Rabin, but also let's not forget that within the Israeli society, they blame one person the most for Rabin's murder, and that is not the guy who killed him, but that is the current prime minister today. So 20 or 30 years later, we are now living under this government, which is obviously not just inflicting pain on the Palestinians, but also many Israelis are protesting it, hoping that this dark night would be behind us, so that perhaps any political solution that could emerge in the future would be genuine and would be something that we could build on. But currently, the way things are going, I'm being honest and I'm being genuine. Not just a two-state solution is impossible, but what we have in the region, the way it exists today, is still at stake and could completely fall and deteriorate.
So what is the path forward for Palestinian governance?
The path forward, immediate and short term, as I said, a ceasefire in Gaza, allowing the Palestinians to rearrange the political theater, allowing the different factions to agree on a Palestinian governing body. As you're aware, we have a Palestinian president that's been in power since 2005, refuses to hold elections. And so we do need the international community's support to call for elections, to have a Palestinian governing body that is representative of the Palestinians. And so this would be the first step after calling for an immediate ceasefire, is having a Palestinian political body that represents the different factions in order to have elections and elect the right leadership that would represent the Palestinians.
And who would you predict would win that? Hamas has tremendous political support, so theoretically, could they win such an election?
I mean, theoretically, anything could happen, right? But the idea that because Hamas could win, they should be pushed out, then we're back to square one. As you may recall, in 2006, Hamas won the parliamentary elections, and that's how they came into power. And the whole idea and practice of democracy was no longer applicable to the Palestinians. Gaza became under siege, and fast forward to today, this is what we are dealing with. So we clearly have to revisit, used approaches and find a way to include everybody. I don't believe that Hamas would win the presidency. I don't believe that they themselves would want the presidency in the current form of politics. I believe, and without getting too much into speculations, I do believe that they would support or at least opt out for supporting a candidate that, as they would call him, a compromise candidate that everybody would agree on and support. So that's my assessment, at least.
Can you have Palestinian democracy without a Palestinian state?
Yes and no. So obviously essential to have a Palestinian democracy, but Palestinians by nature, we are, we do practice democracy. We stand up for democracy. We want democracy. Aside and outside the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, you will find that many Palestinian activists on the ground are always protesting undemocratic practices. Some have given up their lives because of their stand for having a democratic, self-governing practice. So yes, Palestinians want democracy. Obviously, that is the preferred form of governance for ourselves, amongst ourselves. But here's the catch. And I'm sure we've heard this before, democracy cannot be exported, meaning it cannot be enforced on us Palestinians by any outside body, but it can always be imported, meaning it has to be organic, it has to grow from the within, and I believe we are ready for that, and that's what we absolutely want.
Israel's goal in its current military campaign is to eliminate Hamas. Do you believe that can happen? And secondly, do you think, in fact, Israel may be breeding a new generation of people of similar ideology?
I believe Israel has already failed in eliminating Hamas. I believe the idea of eliminating an ideology that has been in power for the past 20 or something years, using military tactics is just is unfounded. I do believe that allowing the Palestinian population, allowing the Palestinians to have a state, to have democratic institutions, and allow everybody to sort of compete for what people want, that is the right way to move forward. So, and to your point, yes, I do believe that what the Israelis have done in Gaza will have instilled in many generations to come extreme views against Israel. I mean, you just have to look at the images, the brutality of the military campaign the Israelis are inflicting. As you're aware, many, thousands of women and children are the majority of the casualties that Israel has caused in Gaza. Over 34,000 people, majority of whom are women and children. So it's impossible to say, no, this will have no effect on the Israelis.
China has been trying to broker reconciliation among the various Palestinian factions. Do you see them using the conflict in Gaza to try to extend their influence in the region?
Yes, I mean, as we heard before on the predictions of democracy and how it's doing, as you saw, there's a sharp increase in the popularity of China and Russia, especially in the MENA region. Look, China has been very active. Last December, China held 4 summits in 1 month in Saudi Arabia, an Arab-China summit, an Arab-Islamic summit, and Saudi Arabia China summit and Islamic Organization summit. So they're very active at increasing their role and their popularity in the Middle East. But I do believe that it's not just because of China's efforts. I believe it's because of our lack of trying, whether it's Europe and the United States, by applying the right pressure, by at least applying the right measures. The way we talk about Ukraine when it comes to Russia, we should at least come forward to holding the same principles, not sacrifice principles for interest when it comes to the Palestinians or any other part of the Middle East for that matter. And as you see, I mean, the issue is not just Israel-Palestine. You're talking about elections, whether it's in Tunisia or Egypt or other places. When the Arab world or majority of whom are young people, when they look at the West speaking about democracy, and at the same time not following through by promoting and hoping that these democratic practices are upheld or applying the right tools, then people start looking elsewhere. And I believe that China and Russia have found an opportunity. And this is not just the Middle East. The idea that, I mean, you have people at your summit from Venezuela, from other places around the world. If I spend my whole life fighting for democratic reform in my country, and I still see that the people who are telling me that I should fight for democracy are embracing the dictator and dealing with him, that's very demoralizing. And I think that is part of the reason why we are not scoring the way we should be when it comes to democracy in the Middle East or even elsewhere. We need to follow, talk the talk, but also we need to actually do the hard work and hold our principles to the test, because I believe that right now we have failed.
And we have to leave it there. Fadi Al-Salameen, non-resident fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And now, coffee break. We will be back in 30 minutes, but get your caffeine out in the foyer.
Սիրում եք գնումներ անել տնից, գերազանց առաջարկ Էլդորադոից։ Օնլայնացում։ Մեր ողջ տեսականիով սրահը ձեր տանը։ Eldorado.am կայքում ապրանքներ զեղչված գներով։ Զինվեք միջոցներով, որ գնեք գերշահավետ ու նաև մասնակցեք 1 միլիոն դրամի տեխնիկայի գովազդային խաղարկությանը։ Դե հանդիպում ենք օնլայն Eldorado.am։ Շահավետ է։
TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat, YouTube. YouTube-ը նոր Bifree 4000 փաթեթում անսահմանափակ է։ Օգտվիր անսահմանափակ YouTube եւ այլ top հավելվածներից, ինչպես նաև վայելիր 30 GB ինտերնետ եւ 1000 րոպե դեպի ՀՀ բոլոր ցանցեր։ Team Telecom Armenia, անսահմանափակ վիդեոներ, անսահմանափակ շփում։
So, welcome back at the Copenhagen Democracy Summit. I hope you had a wonderful and nice coffee break, and we are going to continue right away with the speech of the Armenian Prime Minister Nikola Pashinyan. Welcome, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Dear participants of the Copenhagen Democracy Summit, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to have this opportunity to share with you the challenges that Armenian democracy is facing. The good news is that democracy has indeed become a reality in Armenia. But what has changed for citizens of Armenia by real democracy? Before the 2018 Velvet Revolution, in our country, massive electoral frauds were the usual companions of elections. There was no trust among the citizens that there is a real chance for them to elect and form the parliament and government. Now the situation is totally different. Citizens know that they are powerful enough to decide. The two general elections that were held in Armenia after the Velvet Revolution have been acknowledged as democratic, free and competitive both by the Armenian society and the international community. Armenia made huge progress in strengthening the democratic institutions, an achievement which is very well reflected in various reputable democracy indexes. Now we are the 43rd in the Reporters Without Borders Freedom of Speech Index, compared to 79th place in 2017. Categorized as having partially free internet in 2017 by Freedom House, now we enjoy the status of country with free internet. In the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, Armenia is now in the 62nd place instead of 107th in 2017. In the Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index, now we are 84th, compared to 111 in 2017. In order to assess this progress, it's essential to note that alongside democratic reforms, Armenia has been contending with external security challenges. 44 days war in Nagorno-Karabakh, invasion of Azerbaijani troops into sovereign territories of Armenia in 2021, in 2022, and occupation of more than 200 square kilometers of Armenian sovereign territories, with the indifference and inaction of Collective Security Treaty Organization, the forced displacement of more than 100,000 Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh have casted doubts among Armenian citizens whether democracy is the right choice or maybe democracy means less security. So democracy needs to prove its efficiency while dealing with security, economic and humanitarian challenges. And we hope to see global democracy standing by us in addressing all those challenges. We are pleased with the deployment of EU monitoring mission alongside the Armenian-Azerbaijani border, and we welcome EU's decision to expand its capacity. On the other hand, we hoped for inclusion of Armenia into the European Peace Facility, and in this regard, we rely on the support of EU member countries. A new set of commitments aimed at strengthening Armenia's economic resilience, state institutions, and addressing humanitarian needs of refugees from Nagorno-Karabakh has been taken on by European Union and United States during the high-level meeting of President of European Commission Ursula von der Leyen, Secretary of State of USA Antony Blinken, and myself which took place on April 5 in Brussels. The rapid and effective implementation of those commitments is of utmost importance. Ladies and gentlemen, despite all the challenges, we believe that the real and most aspiring companion for democracy is lasting and sustainable peace. And my government took the share of its responsibility for this. Recently, we reached to an agreement with Azerbaijan to start the delimitation of our interstate borders on the basis of Almaty Declaration of 1991. That means that during the delimitation, we should simply reproduce the administrative borders between Soviet Armenia and Soviet Azerbaijan, which become state borders according to Almaty Declaration. The start of border delimitation is the implementation of agreement reached during the quadrilateral meeting of October 6 of 2022 between the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, President of European Council, Charles Michel, President Aliyev of Azerbaijan, and me. It took place in Prague. Now it is time to incorporate and reflect those agreements in the peace treaty and have it signed. Another key point for our regional stability is the Crossroads of Peace project initiated by my government. This project implies that Armenia and Azerbaijan restore and open transport and other communications in accordance with the sovereignty and jurisdiction of the countries through which they pass and comply with the principles of equality and reciprocity. These elements of the concept were agreed upon during the meeting of July 15 on 2023 between the President of Azerbaijan and myself, facilitated by the President of European Council, Charles Michel, and are reflected in the public statement made by President Michel as a result of the meeting. We are ready to move toward the implementation of what has been agreed. Ladies and gentlemen, before answering your questions, I would like to stress that democracy is a strategy for Armenia. In democracy we believe, in democracy we live. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, and I will welcome you on stage for further debate. Thank you very much. Please come.
Yes.
Before we start, I will encourage you again to send your questions through the iPad. I will again try to incorporate them in the discussion. But you mentioned your very particular situation, also security situation of Armenia. Now, Anders Fogh Rasmussen has earlier labeled this your neighbor situation an axis of autocracies. So it's a very difficult geopolitical and geographical situation. How do you deal with the question of security in that environment?
You know, to be honest, I wouldn't like to comment on the internal situation of our neighboring countries. But from the other side, as I said, democracy isn't something brought by circumstances to Armenia. I believe it is fully matches with the mentality of our people, and it is a strategy for our government. It is our political belief. It is our political identity as well, because if you would know the record, our political team, the most part of our life, we were fighting for democracy, rule of law, freedom of speech in our country, and now we have opportunity to implement all those values in our country. But of course, the security situation was complicated, and now even more complicated, not only due to our regional situation, but for global situation as well. because obviously a global order is collapsing now. And it was my assessment, and I guess I shared that assessment publicly as well, that the war that happened in our region, it was kind of prelude of further developments. So now the main issue is security. And what is our strategic view? How are we going to provide security for our country? Recently, I made a speech in our parliament saying that I think that the most important tool for securing or for delivering security, it is the legitimate foreign policy, and that's why we are mentioning so frequently Almaty Declaration of 1991. I would like to share with audience what it is, Almaty Declaration. It was adopted by 12 Soviet republics, pointing out two very important ideas. First, Soviet Union stops to exist, and borders, administrative borders between Soviet Union, Soviet republics become state borders, because Soviet republics are becoming independent countries. So now I think it is very important to know. And in the 6th October in Prague, we had quadrilateral meeting with participation of French president, president of European Council, Azerbaijani president, and myself. And there were two very important agreements reached. First, that Armenia and Azerbaijan recognize each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty on the basis of Almaty Declaration, according to Almaty Declaration, and Almaty Declaration should be a basis for delimitation process of the border between two countries. And now that's why I said that that means that we don't need to create new border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We need just reproduce the existing border on the ground. So that process is going on, and we hope that we will be persistent on that.
The whole conflict on the border, which we have followed over the past month and years, obviously plays against the background of the broader situation of the relationship with Russia and the role of Russia for Armenia. How would you elaborate this currently?
You know that Armenia is a member of CSTO, and now also formally we are a member of CSTO, but I announced that we have frozen our participation.
Will you stay member, or are you planning to leave?
It is the topic for further conversation, but it is very important to state the current situation. And the problem and crisis in our relations emerged from that point when Azerbaijani troops invaded into Armenia, and according to the procedures of CSTO, organization and member states should support and help Armenia in this situation. But even after official requests, CSTO refused to make some concrete steps, and actually that is the main reason that we have frozen our participation in all level of CSTO.
And now your expectation is that the West steps into the vacuum and provides you with the security?
You know, after our political position and our policy is to diversify our foreign relations in all spheres. Now we are creating some cooperation in security field with India, with France, with other countries, and now we hope to, and now we have some kind of cooperation with the European Union, because, as I said, we are happy with deployment in European civilian monitoring mission in our border with Azerbaijan. Of course, it is civilian mission, but from the other side, it is a kind of a new factor in security of our region. And it is first time when European Union somehow is involved in the security agenda of Republic of Armenia.
And it comes with a clear expectation to be member of the EU.
Now we are looking forward, we are waiting for the decision of European Union to include Armenia into European Peace Facility. And we hope to start to have visa liberalization negotiations start. And last year I announced in European Parliament that Armenia is ready to be as close to European Union as the European Union would consider possible. And that is our position, and it's still there.
We come to one question from the audience, which also is connected directly to the opportunities that you might have to get closer to Europe, which is, can you elaborate on the initiatives Armenia is taking on to fight corruption?
As I said, we have huge progress on fighting corruption, but unfortunately, we can't say that we have managed to eliminate corruption from Armenia. But what to do? To continue, to be persistent, to be persistent in the democratic reform agenda, and that's why the cooperation with the European Union is of utmost importance for us, because European Union now is our main partner in democratic reform agenda. But we hope that the European Union and United States as well, they will increase the level of supporting us in democratic reform agenda, because, as I said, democracy is a strategy for us, and we need. And we have, by the way, started strategic dialogue with United States in 2019, and now we see the enhancement of our cooperation with the European Union. And recently, I mentioned we had a trilateral meeting with United States, European Union, and Armenia. And by the way, it was unprecedented format, and we adopted a huge agenda for institutional reforms, for economic reforms, and it is very important that we hope to have more and more support and tangible support from European Union and United States for addressing humanitarian needs of the refugees from Nagorno-Karabakh, which is also very important because it is a very sensitive and emotional issue for Armenians, obviously, a humanitarian issue.
My last question of this panel will be the last question of my former panel also. If you could name a year when Armenia would be, in your ideas, a member of the EU, what year would that be?
What?
What year, if you could make a wish, Armenia could be a member of the EU?
What year?
Yes.
This.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you. That's it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And we are going into the next session, and I welcome Suzanne Lynch on the stage. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, again. I'm delighted to be chairing this session. Europe votes. Europe's democratic trajectory. It's obviously a crucial moment, and we're literally just a few weeks from European elections. They only happen every 5 years, and it's the big exercise in democracy that happens within the EU. That will, of course, in turn trigger a whole rejigging, or maybe not, of some of the big top EU jobs, who heads the European Commission, the Council, and so forth. So a lot at stake. So I'd like to welcome our 3 MEPs, straight from the campaign trail in some instances, to join me on the stage. So Michiel Huijven, a member of the European Parliament for the Netherlands, Morten Lockhart, a member of the European Parliament here in Denmark, and Lydia Pereira, member from Portugal. Thank you very much. So we've a nice geographical and political, I think, balance. And special thanks to you, Morten Lockhart, for joining us. You're replacing, we had a last-minute change. Marketa Gregorova could not be with us, so thanks for stepping in. Look, just to start quite generally, we're hearing a lot about the problem of disinformation and election interference. How big of an issue do you think this is for the European Parliament? I'll start with you, Michiel.
Well, if you look at not only the European Parliament elections, but if you look at elections in general, I think it's a problem. I think we're coming from a time where politicians, when they made statements, when they gave their opinions, they were carefully vetted and fact-checked in journals or magazines. And right now, you can have your stage on social media and you can just basically say whatever you like. You can gain a lot of traction with that. So I think there's also a responsibility with the politicians themselves. And that's also coming from the outside, that they're tapping into these anxieties that these politicians are propagating.
Lydia.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's good to have a little break from the campaign trail and to discuss these important topics. Well, when it comes to disinformation, we are in a very strange time, but it's not going to change. What we have to deal with is to try to learn in navigating through this new framework of information being spread in a very quick way. And we need to form a coalition of politicians, of stakeholders, to find a way to legitimate what is told in the internet, for example. And I do believe that disinformation can contribute to a lot of challenges in our democracy, but it can also create the necessary framework to to navigate through these new modern ways of doing politics. I don't think social media is going to disappear, quite the contrary. So we politicians and the rest of the society, we have to learn in adapting to these new ways of doing politics, and obviously reinforcing the mechanisms to do the necessary checks and balances in disinformation. So I do think that there is a huge responsibility from the media perspective. They still play a huge role. And one of the things that I think it is necessary is to make sure that the politicians are not away or aside of the media. And there is a little bit of a incentive sometimes to push the politicians away from the media, and then they are in the social media, in the social networks. So I think we need to find a way of reconciling these new elements and trying to define the right framework to deal with it. But obviously using the social media as partners and not as agents of evil.
Yeah, Morten Lockhart, I mean, what do you think? I mean, where should, not the blame lie, but how is Europe dealing with this? Should politicians be doing more to try and rein in social media giants? Whose responsibility is it to try and improve this social media landscape that we see infiltrating the election cycles and leading in a lot of cases to misinformation proliferating?
Well, I've been a part of a committee in the parliament dealing with hybrid wars, so to speak, also disinformation. And I would say that we have been all too naive, and we bear a lot of responsibility ourselves as politicians because we didn't see the danger coming, and now we are sort of reacting to things instead of preventing things from happening. So we actually need to do both. I mean, in Denmark, it's not as big as a problem as in many other countries, I would admit, but right at the moment, and some of the audience here would know, it's just exploding because we have this very heated debate about deep fakes, how AI as a technology are dealt with at a political level, because Danish political parties actually use deep fakes at the same time as they are, protesting and talking about them as an evil. So it's a kind of, temptation that we have to resist. I think as politicians, we might not be able to, at least, and that was as late as yesterday. I suggested this to the Speaker of the House in the Danish Parliament to create some kind of code of conduct, so we at least as political parties can rally together about this. So we at least could show our voters and the audience as such that we take this seriously.
Yeah, interesting points there. I mean, you're all campaigning for re-election, and I know you've been out at the doorstep, as it were. I think Brussels and Strasbourg are pretty empty at the moment, with a lot of the politicians back in their home countries trying to get some votes. Just to get into some of the big themes of this election, one of the features we have seen over the last few months really has been massive farming protests in particular. It's happened in Brussels, but also in Italy and Spain. And a backlash of sorts against towards the EU's climate policy. Ursula von der Leyen, who we heard from earlier, put the Green Deal at the heart of her mandate 5 years ago. Now we don't hear that much about it. It's kind of been, it's more of a sideshow. Maybe starting with you, Lydia Pereira. You're a member of the centre-right European People's Party, the EPP, von der Leyen's party. Do you think that the EU has gone too far when it comes to climate regulation?
Well, first of all, I think the Green Deal has not came out of the political agenda at the moment. Quite the contrary. If we look at the past 5 years, the Green Deal was presented in, I think, December 2020, and then at the peak of the pandemic, we approved the European climate law. And so over the past 5 years, climate and environment have been central to the political agenda in the European field. Now, the question is, did we acknowledge for the necessary efforts for, a difficult transition in combining the legislation being implemented and the response from the agents impacted by the legislation? So I think one of the difficulties that we faced and that resulted in the protests is that the transition is eventually a little bit is being demanded in a quicker way than the capacity that these agents can, and in particular the farmers, can accommodate. But this does not mean that that there is this sense of being against the climate policy. It's just like asking for a little bit of more reason when it comes to the implementation of the legislation, and learning and then trying to understand the context. Like 5 years ago, we did not have a war in Europe. And we don't have a war inside the European borders, but we have a war in Europe. So in terms of the food security, things have changed, and we also have to acknowledge that. And I do believe that one of the challenges for the next term is to make sure that we keep the track in terms of our climate goals for the 2030 and for climate neutrality by 2050. And I do not think that is at stake. I have been leading several negotiations, in particular for the position of the European Parliament to the COPs, but also in creating the voluntary carbon credit market in the EU. So I do believe that we are in a condition that we can meet the climate goals, but we also have to, in the dialogue, keep all the agents inside and involved in this transition. That we know it's not easy, but we need to make an effort. And so, in dialogue, I think we can achieve these objectives.
Yeah, thank you. Your party and you've been very critical of. You're part of the ECR group, that conservative group in the Parliament. You've been very critical, obviously, of a lot of EU regulation on business and climate.
Sure.
You have a smile on your face about this kind of shift in emphasis, we'll say, away from climate targets?
Well, not a smile on my face, because I'm speaking to entrepreneurs, not only farmers, but also small, medium-sized businesses who are now being victimized by the European Commission with stringent rules and regulations. The European Commission, when they came into being in 2019, they promised a one in, one out principle. So every new rule that was introduced, they would have an older rule removed. They haven't adhered to this. And what we're seeing now is that the politicians and the European Commission is now recognizing that they have been too fast with their climate regulation as well. And it has now backfired. I mean, it's very easy to sit in a boardroom and say, well, we want to be net zero in 2050, or we come up with a fit for 55. It all sounds very nice, but it's all very far away in the future. But if you start actually implementing it, and if you start to have these effects on our small, medium-sized businesses, on our farmers, they have to deal with the effects of this stringent bureaucratic rules and regulation, and that has now been backfired. So not a smile on my face in terms of, because our entrepreneurs are having really this hard time, but it makes me glad to hear that that common sense, that a new strategy is now creeping into the European Parliament when it comes to, for example, focusing on green growth, for example, on focusing on more on market-driven innovations instead of a centralized system of subsidies and more debt.
And yet, the European Union has to be careful that it does not lose out in terms of environmentally friendly innovation. We've seen the US invest in the Inflation Reduction Act. We see China getting ahead of the curve on electric vehicles. So surely business needs to be at the table and be on top of this and be ahead when it comes to this.
That brings up the question, does the United States have an effective policy? I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act is mostly based on tax breaks for companies that are considered green, but you also see that the US government debt is skyrocketing, and this debt at some point has to be repaid. Same goes for China. If you look at the state-subsidized companies, not many of them are actually performing that well. If you look at the private enterprises in China, they are performing much better. So I think in the European Union we should recognize that we should open up our markets, we should have free trade, we should focus on free trade and more on private investments instead of focusing on these highly subsidized tax breaks that we're seeing right now.
Morten, just on this point about the Green Deal, I mean, you're in the Liberal Renew Europe group. I mean, what's your view on this? Do you think, it's a difficult balance. You've got a particularly younger electorate who are very engaged with the issue of climate change. I mean, are you getting that on the doorstep? Is it coming up as an issue, this whole climate issue, or not so much?
I think it's difficult to be a Dane in this discussion because we are a completely different place in Denmark when we compare to many of the other countries that we are dealing with here and discussing, because our goals and our task is much more ambitious than the European one. So trying to bring on these very nice arguments, I can't disagree with most of what you said. Being a liberal myself and a market liberal also, it's also very difficult to go up against the Danish discussion, which is quite more green in the sense of the word. So but I would agree that competitiveness is on the agenda again. After decades out in the cold. Now it's on the agenda, and we all need to take this into consideration. We are entering a new phase in this discussion about climate change because now we also have to deal with the problems of financing. I mean, we are talking about 1.5 trillion euros in the years to come in investments, and who is going to pay this? And this is why we have the farmers protesting, basically, because they can see that they have to pay as well. And so there's other groups and other interests in this society. So this fight is ongoing right now, and it's not a coincidence. It's because we are entering into the hard phase after all the speeches, after all the agreements on the goals. We need now to get back to reality. And that's why we, as Venstre and as a Renew group, talk about green realism. We need to get to the phase of realism now. And of course, it's not to say that you can't negotiate with climate as such. We need to get to the goals, but we need to find the right ways to financing and the right ways to actually pay for this. And this is not an easy task. It never was, and that's what we see right now.
And of course, one of the issues that contributed to the farming protest this year was concern about Ukrainian exports or grain and other products coming through Europe. Yes. And that, of course, is a big worry. We were hearing a lot this morning about Ukraine and its membership perspective for the EU. Now, we also heard European Council President Charles Michel saying he is confident that there will be a kind of a I'm misquoting, but a pro-Ukraine parliament in the next 5 years. But I think it is a concern that, once Europe was faced with the reality, of a possible Ukrainian integration into the single market, that was the response. It was protest. But on that issue, just thinking about the shape of the next European Parliament, we've seen a lot of the polling showing there's going to be a shift to the right in the next elections. Lydia Pereira, how do you feel? You're part of the EPP, which is the largest group in the European Parliament. I mean, how do you feel about tying up with maybe the ECR or other more right-wing groups in the next mandate? Would you favour that?
That's a very good question. And actually, on several occasions, me and Michael, we've worked together, so it's not a brand new, let's say, coalition. Well, I think there is a lot of speculation about the composition of the next parliament, and there's the fear of the composition of the next parliament is being spreaded. And I do think that we need a little bit of reason and sense in reading this new outcome of the European elections. I mean, democracies are in their lowest levels of approval worldwide. And so there's a lot of discontent in the societies. And I do believe that moderate parties and moderate politicians need to understand this and need to deliver for people. Over the past 5 years, on several occasions, I felt like there was a loss of sense or focus from some of the parliamentary groups in the parliament in falling in the trap of the most radicalized fringes of their moderate political groups. So I do believe that there is a priority for the next term, which is for the moderate political parties to sit together and to understand what are the objectives for the next term and try to put aside, the little battles and wars that lead nowhere. We are in a difficult situation with a war in Ukraine, with a war in the Middle East, with several regional wars outside of Europe in other geographies in the world that can quickly become international conflicts. And I think for the next term, the priority of keeping the European Union speaking at one voice, which has been critical on several occasions, is something that we really need to deliver. And so there is this a priority for the moderate political parties to find again in the European Parliament, which is the house of compromise, that we have to deliver for our people and that we are serving our people and not losing track of what brought us to the Parliament in the first place.
Okay. Michiel, you represent the Netherlands. Yep. There's obviously been a big right-wing swing there we saw in recent elections. What's your view on the makeup of the next European Parliament? Do you think the ECR will be a kingmaker of sorts in the next Parliament?
Could be, and I find it actually quite interesting that I'm campaigning for a few weeks now, and most of the debates I'm in is about the danger of a far-right rise in the European Parliament. Now, I don't really think the risk is that, in terms of policy, is that these parties could become bigger. I think it's a healthy democratic course correction. People have been asking for a more strict migration policy for decades now. They are crying out for less bureaucracy, a more competitive economy. So I don't think the risk is there in terms of policy. I think the main risk is, and that's with the experience that you and I probably share, is that when you look at the fringes of the European Parliament, these are very effective politicians when it comes to being angry, saying how it should be, but not on delivering actual policy. If you look at the groups that are on the fringes, whether it's the far left or the far right, they are not very effective, or actually completely ineffective, in terms of legislative power. So what I think the biggest risk is that these parties, as we've seen in the Netherlands right now, is that these parties will become so big that they need to start delivering, but they're unable to do so. And that even creates a more dissatisfied democracy across Europe.
Morten.
Yeah, but let's talk straight here. We're not talking about ECR as the right-wing populist here. I mean, if you get rid of the polls, we can talk about a group where you're actually quite moderate. We had very good experiences, for instance, in the Internal Market Committee where I've been working with you guys on taxation, on market issues. I didn't hear you say anything wrong today. I mean, it's obvious that we can make policies with you. And of course, we hope to do that also if you get your act together in your group. What really matters is the ID group. That's basically what we are talking about. I mean, with parties financed by the Russians. I mean, come on, this is a total different matter. And of course, we have to deal with that. And I would agree at your analysis that these groups are unable to do anything efficient. I don't expect them to. I expect them to grow, yes, but I don't expect them to be a part of the coalition at all at any moment in time. So what we're talking about is basically whether the von der Leyen coalition, which is SD, EPP, and us in Renew, whether this will have an absolute majority. I absolutely mean that I think we will have, but we will of course invite ECR to the table, and part of our groups also like to invite the Green Group. But they are totally, not trustworthy, so it's also a problem. Let's just hope that we can get our coalition back on track.
But just on that, I mean, you're saying the ECR are the kind of, the moderate wing of the right, if you like, in the parliament. But I mean, we have a situation where Viktor Orban may join the ECR group. I mean, would you be happy to...
Not really. I can't say that. That's now. I just said it. I mean, that I can't. I don't think I could get more clear on this one. I think that within each group, we also have Meloni from Italy. I mean,
there might be bridges.
Yeah, there might be bridges, and in everyday politics, I think it's we are able to work with these groups. It's not about Orban or not Orban. It's about how we work in the daily work.
Can I just say? There might be bridges, but there have to be bridges with all political moderate groups and parties. So this is crucial. We cannot antagonize one side of the political spectrum expecting that the policies are going to be better. We need to find dialogue again. And I felt like over the past 5 years, and for example on taxation, and we've both worked a lot on that, there was... I have to say this, from the left camp of the parliament, a lot of times our concerns were not listened to. And this created, in the parliament, it created a rejection of several reports on taxation. So I really think, and I want to insist on this, dialogue is crucial and building bridges across political groups as well, understanding the red lines that one defines. In particular, are we willing to cooperate with parties that have a different understanding of the rule of law? Well, that has to be addressed, I think.
But I mean, it does sound from the three of you in a way that it's kind of this acceptance has now set in, really, that there is going to be a shift to the right and everyone's okay with that. I mean, what about this liberal wing in the
But if there's a shift to the right, it's about the people's choice. It's not that we are doing our job. We are on the campaign trail. I'm from the center-right, but Michael and the liberals, I mean, they are doing their best. So we cannot antagonize what is the outcome. We have to deal with that, and we have to adjust to the new circumstances of the political camp.
Because it is a democratic election, and as you say, the voters will have their say. Really quick final question. I mean, it's linked to this. Another big issue is migration. Are you hearing this in the doors? I mean, fascinating statistic in the Democracy Perception Index that's just been out is that in Germany, migration is now topping priorities. That's been a big change around from the last few years. I mean, you guys finding this in the doorstep, or is the EU, I mean, we had the EU Asylum and Migration Pact through. Is it enough, or do you think this is going to be a big issue, and is that going to manifest itself in the election in a few weeks?
Well, it's actually quite interesting. I just had a meeting in the Danish parliament, and I was being told that in Denmark, this is not really an issue that's topping all the lists, because there is more or less consensus in Denmark on that a more strict but fair immigration system is needed. What we see in my country, the Netherlands, it's out of control. There is no control over our borders, over our migration system, over our asylum system. So that really needs to be changed. And our view is that if you want to have a successful common market with free movement of people, goods and services, you also need to have strong common borders. And that has been lacking for the last couple of decades.
I mean, more than just coming here on the Danish, is that a characterization?
I don't know who you've been talking to, but at least in some part of the environment, at least outside Christiansborg, I think if you move to the countryside, I think that there's a lot of talk about migration. I wouldn't say that it's all, substantialized in the sense that facts are worrying at all. We have things under control, so to speak. So much is right, but there's a lot of talk about it. There's a lot of fear still among people, and we realized that pretty late in our discussions within my party. I was responsible for our EU election program, and this was not at the top of the agenda at all because we shared this point of view. But lately we have been forced to realize that this is actually a big issue among voters. So we will come with the suggestions and ideas also in this field in the campaign. Yes.
Final thought to you, MEP Pereira.
Yeah, immigration is obviously one of the topics in the campaign as well in Portugal, and I think it is very important that we don't leave this topic for the radical parties. From the right wing and from the left. And I do believe that the Asylum and Migration Pact is not perfect, but it is one that was possible to find consensus on. And so I think it is one step towards a better coordination in terms of the migration policy in the EU.
And only a small step, though. Only a small step.
Well, it's one step. Even small.
Okay, well, thank you very much to our three members of the European Parliament who took out time from a very busy campaign schedule to join us here in Copenhagen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So some of you may have seen the exhibit out in the lobby, Russian Rocket 2022. We're now going to tell you a little bit more about that exhibit. Let me introduce Natalia Popovich from the House of Ukraine. Natalia.
Hi, my name is Natalia Popovich from Ukraine House in Denmark. In the foyer, you will see an art installation by Zhanna Kadyrova. As a Ukrainian artist, Zhanna often travels outside of Ukraine to peaceful countries. In those peaceful countries, she often thinks about the death and horror and destruction at home, contrasted with the relative peace in the countries she visits. That has actually led her to create the Russian Rocket 2022 project, which you can see in the lobby. I hold the stickers of the Russian Kinzhal ballistic missiles, which you can get from my colleagues. They can be stuck inside a moving bus or a car or a train. They can create an illusion of a Russian missile in your town. And of course, you can stop this illusion from becoming a reality in your towns and cities by giving Ukraine the weapons and support we need to win this war. Thank you very much. Come by and get your stickers. Enjoy your lunch.
Natalia, thank you. And now it is time for lunch. When we come back, more in-depth and high-powered discussion about Ukraine. See you in a bit.